And frankly, I love that our competitors have to try to compete with us. They're now focused on helmet weight. The new Shed helmet came out and they're talking about helmet weight. 2 years ago, your helmet weighed 6 pounds. So competition makes all of us better. And that's the beauty of the country. It's the beauty of the sport.
We'll roll right into it. So yeah, without any further ado, here he is. So Nick, welcome to the show. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me today. Really appreciate it. Excited and looking forward to diving right in and covering the gamut.
So before we start talking about your journey, can you just give our audience a quick thumbnail on who you are and what you currently do?
Sure. My name's Nick Esayian. I'm the CEO and founder of Light Helmets. We make football helmets for the NFL, NCAA, youth leagues, flag football headgear, and we've got a variety of other products here on the horizon. Company's been around since about end of 2018. I've got a career history in corporate America, entrepreneurial areas, and then I race automobiles professionally for about 27 years.
So there's a lot that we're gonna dive into this. And like I mentioned before we recorded, I'm pretty excited about it. Before we start talking about all the cool things that you're currently doing, where's your origin story? Where'd you grow up, and what did that look like?
Sure. So I grew up in a little town in Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin, called Racine, Wisconsin. My parents, great mom and dad. One of the challenges in life I had was not, unstable home life. Like everybody's got issues. I was a young kid. My parents were married 61 years, only child. I was born in the late 60s. So, my early memories were watching the news and, the tail end of the Vietnam War. But it was kind of an interesting scenario because my parents had sent me to a Lutheran school, and I didn't really belong with that group of kids because I didn't go to the Lutheran church. I went to the Armenian church. And a lot of people don't know, but the Armenian church, the Catholic church, Greek church, they were all the same at one point. So the religions are kind of the same, Christian religion. And then at my church, I didn't fit in because I didn't go to school with those kids. So I always kind of was like, the odd man out. And I certainly didn't know much better at the time, but without any brothers and sisters and being in that scenario, I really was kind of like, kind of in that lone survivor mentality as a kid, right? You don't know any better, but at the same time, you're like, I don't fit in over there and I don't fit in over there. I got to figure my own out.
So when did this occur to you? I know you said you didn't realize at the time, but is this something that you've reflected on at a later date, or did you come to this realization like, middle school, high school time?
I will say that I really got picked on when I was young. I was young in terms of I was a November birthday. So like when I went to high school, I was 13 years old. I didn't even weigh 100 pounds. So when I went out for the football team, people were like, holy man, like we don't even want to hit this kid. He looks like he's in, 5th grade. So I realized it at the time, but you're trying to fit in, you're growing up. I was a decent student, not a great student. I was a horrible athlete in grade school. I kind of found my way once I got into high school and started playing football, and all of a sudden I popped up, and as a junior, I was about this size, and then things changed. But I think all of those struggles that I went through, whether it was kind of being the odd person out, getting picked on a little bit, having to deal with maybe not fitting in from an athletic perspective early on, it really created some desire to do that. So you make an effort. I mean, you build up some grit and some resilience. Now, at the time, I had no clue. It was just, a little bit uncomfortable as a young person. And I'm sensitive to kids now. I was probably overly sensitive to my kids. You want your kids to be able to fit in, but they do need to go through some level of, adversity. Otherwise, you don't know how to deal with it as you get older. And I think all of that served me well, albeit painful at the time. And I do give my parents credit for being able to balance it. Now, if we were in the days of modern times with social media, gosh, I can't even imagine applying that same situation and what kids go through today. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I was probably fortunate not to be born in today's world.
Yeah, I feel similarly especially with social media. Once I got to high school and college, I'm glad there wasn't social media around. I mean, nothing.
I mean, I probably have some criminal stuff where the statute of limitations haven't expired, so I won't say anything. But if there were camera phones and social media when I was in high school or college, I'd probably be taking the medal cup and going across the bars right now. So
Yeah. So when you said horrible at sports, that's a strong word. Did you have lack of coordination also? Was it just your size, or did you just didn't have hand-eye coordination? Like what else was there?
it's a great question, and don't feel guilty about asking it. I was just a year younger, and when you're a young man and you're, let's say, in sixth grade, and you're a year younger than everyone else, because you're developing so quickly, you're physically just not able to compete at that level. When in a junior varsity environment, it's by grade. When I got switched over to Pop Warner, because I was small, but when I was put on a Pop Warner team, but I was competing with kids that were my age, it didn't matter as much. And that really helped build confidence for me. And my father played football at the University of Milwaukee when they actually had a football team for a year. And I remember seeing a picture of him as a little kid. And of course, I idolized your dad. And I wanted to play football. And the Packers had just run through their years of glory in the late 60s, early 70s before times got dark in Green Bay. And I wanted to play football, but you play flag football and then you get into full contact football. But that really was a transitional time for me, because I learned how to deal with kids of all different races, nationalities, religions. And it really didn't matter in football, even at that time when things were a little bit different. You really just cared about it being, hey, it's 3rd and 8. We got to make this work. And the kids that you ran with and you went through this with were really your kind of your friends and your family. And I really gelled in that space because that's where I did fit in. And albeit not the greatest athlete, just being behind age-wise, I caught up in high school, but that you're not quite there. And I remember a principal actually said to me, I remember doing a triple jump, and he looked at me and he shook his head and he said, well, Nick, he goes, maybe when you get to college. And I can't imagine a teacher saying that to a kid now, but it was like somebody like sticking a needle in me and deflating the air. But hey, you had to come back from that.
Yeah. So one of the things that you just touched upon was the experiences you have in meeting different people and going up adversity. It's a common theme among entrepreneurs, like the different things that they have to go through and what they realize, and especially being able to work with different people. So it's really cool to hear you say not only your experience early, but then the things that you had to do to adjust. So once you started playing sports and you started to catch up, I'm interested, like, how far did you take it? Because you were playing high school, but then you became a race car driver. Were you into driving earlier on also, or was that later down the line?
No, it's funny because my father was a medical examiner. So my parents were so worried about something bad happening to me that I think I was playing tackle football and driving before I could mow the lawn. They didn't want their only kid to get hurt. Now, the reality was, I played football in high school, played baseball in high school. I wasn't a very good basketball player. And then I played a little bit of football at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I took a swing at playing quarterback. I ended up being a Z. And then I tried out for the Milwaukee Express, which was an outdoor semi-pro football team. Dabbled in that a little bit in the early 90s. And I was actually at a gym and I saw a poster up about a driving school, a local driving school. So I actually went and I thought, man, this is cool. And I'd always been a motorsports fan in terms of motorcycles and cars. But auto racing is you really have to either have some knowledge to be able to, at an amateur level, maintain and prepare the car yourself, which I had zero. I could put gas in the car, or you had to have the money to be able to, finance a crew or rent a competitive ride. I had neither. And I just decided to jump in the deep end. And that's how the motorsports career got started. But I was working at the same time, and trying to do both was really an interesting challenge. If I had to go back and do it again, knowing what I know now, of course I would make the same decision, because I'm happy with where my life is, at least right now, mostly. But when I look back, man, living both of those lives, I never had a summer from maybe 1991 to 2019, 2020, because I was at the racetrack from March until October, traveling around the United States, Canada, Mexico, some other places, racing cars.
So what was the job that you were doing when you started dipping your toe into race car driving?
So it was 1990, May of 1990. I graduate with an undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, which is a D3 school. I didn't have the grades nor the athletic prowess to end up anywhere else. Although they've won their share of national championships for D3, I squeak out of there with a 3.51 GPA in the business school, and you had to have a 3.5. So that shows you, how I barely made it out.
I was wondering when you put that one after the 5, I was like, wow, that's precise.
Yeah. My old former girlfriend was a counselor, and she said to me, I walked in, she goes, Nick, you need to get 18 credits of A's in your last semester or you're not going to graduate. And if you end up with even a low B, you'll never get your grade point up. And I just remember sweating. I had friends that were making diplomas up on a Xerox Docutech and giving it to their parents so that they look like they graduate. I'm like, I'm not joining that club. So really put my nose to the grindstone and kind of stayed out of trouble and pressed it across the goal line. But there weren't a lot of jobs in the early 90s, 1990, especially, the first Gulf War had yet to take place. We're in the middle of a recession. My options were going in the Marine Corps, working for 3M selling building supplies, or they were interviewing 190 people to fill 2 spots at the Xerox Corporation. And at the time, Xerox had just won the Malcolm Baldrige Award. It was still a big company with almost 100,000 employees. And they had some of the greatest sales, finance, management training on the planet. And I was fortunate enough, the people that did the hiring, it was almost like trading places. They hired one guy that never drank a beer, dressed in pressed shirts and, undergraduate classes. And then there was me, drinking beer out of my Moose's Loose cup, in my afternoon class before heading out and causing trouble. And this gentleman and I, his name's Bill Roscoff, he and I got to be great friends. And he was a football player at another school, transferred in. And I ended up going through all these interviews and I got this job at Xerox. And I remember my initial salary, I think, was $24,000. And I was so excited. And as I got out, I'm in the race space, $24,000 didn't go very far at all, right? So, then I'm playing this game of credit card, paying things off, racing. Oh, you know what? You can go to this race out here. It's a little bit farther away. It's going to cost you an extra $1,500. And my crew guy was paying $20 a day. But the second my job would end, we'd get in a car and we'd drive to a track, roll the car off the trailer, and then race, sun or shine. And I didn't know how to do anything on the car. So my poor crew guy was, really an indentured servant to the effort. And I was blessed to have some great people around me until I got in the pro ranks where somebody else took care of it for me.
So when you see this poster and you don't know not much about it, but you follow it. So what was the first step? Where do you go to the meeting or you go to the event and they do training? Was it a specific type of car that you start on? Walk me through that process.
Sure. And it's a lot different now than it is then. And we can talk a little bit about that because everybody's like, oh man, I'd be a great race car driver. If they drive 15 miles an hour fast on the highway, they're ready to be in Formula One in the documentary. So for me, the first thing I did is I started to do where you show up with your street car and they set up a course with cones. And it's called autocross or gymkhana. And you have similar cars in a similar class. One person goes at a time and you race the stopwatch. You're racing the course. And the person with the best time runs. You might get 4 or 5 shots or bites at the apple. And you learn car control there. And you also learn if you've got an affinity for this because you have to understand that you're taking this 4,000-pound weight and you're balancing it on 4 balloons with steering, brake, and power. So there's a physics to it. And there's some setup to a car, but a street car, you can't really make too many changes to. But I quickly realized I had pretty good car control, and that's probably growing up driving in the snow in Wisconsin. And, I did that for a couple of years, and I thought, man, I'd really like to do some real sports car racing. And I got in a new Eagle Talon, which at the time was this little sporty 4-wheel drive car. And someone asked me and said, we need to use your car as a pace car at this amateur race. If you come to the race and you let us use your car, you can ride in the pace car. And I thought, perfect. So I get there, I'm on the track, 30 seconds. I'm like, I have to do this. So walked around the paddock, found somebody that had a car, a spare car, an older car, and she was willing to rent it to me for a very reasonable dollar amount. And, she saw me jump out of the pace car. I had to be someone, right? And this is Black Hawk Farms, like Rockford, Illinois, a little track. And the people were so nice to me. The first race I show up, I'm winning the race, and I end up passing some slow traffic, fly off the track, hit the wall, get back on track, still end up winning the race. And I got home and I tell my parents this story and they're terrified, right? They're watching these car crashes on Sunday television. So it was an interesting play because you have this now very individual sport coming out of playing football, which is really a team sport. And I learned a lot, but the process really is you go to a driving school. You can go to Skip Barber, Bob Bondurant, or something like that. You can get a novice permit. The novice permit lets you go and compete in a very low level race. And they put a big X on the back of your car so people know that you don't know what the hell you're doing on track. So be prepared for the worst as we go by this amateur. And once you run so many of those races without causing any type of, catastrophe, then you're allowed to have, a regional license, which lets you race at a low level. And then there are various stages of licensing. And, there are people that start racing in their 50s and 60s when their financial situation allows, because it can be very expensive. And then there are other people that'll go and they'll race spec Miatas, and that's their hobby in life and their community. And the racing world really taught me what selflessness was, because again, I didn't know how to do anything on these cars. And I would have competitors that I would be, racing against, and in a lot of cases beating. They would come over and work on my car for me because something would break and I didn't know how to fix or repair it. And it was really a growth process. But the other component of it is there's nowhere to hide in a race car. There's a video camera. And when I was pro racing, there's maybe 6 of them in the car. They're on your feet, your hands, your eyes, your helmet, out the front, out the back. There's a complex data system that's tracking all of this stuff. You can't say, I was flat through that corner. Any engineer looking at the data, and you yourself, you can't hide. And it's the ultimate sport in terms of personal responsibility.
And when you're doing these races, when did you start to figure out like which type of cars were the best, the ones that you wanted to race? And I know very little about the sport. I do the speed limit on the road. I drive a hybrid car. So like, I'm not a race car driver, but like, I know there's a big difference between the NASCAR and the stock cars and F1. Like when did you start to figure out like, oh, this is the lane that I want to take in this career?
So, they're open wheel cars like a Formula One car, Indy car, Indy Lights, Toyota Atlantic, all the way down to like a Formula Ford or Formula V. And those almost look like a go-kart up to, these Formula One cars where Mercedes has 2,000 employees, working on 2 cars, which is crazy, including development. NASCAR is a closed US-based series. The cockpits are you're inside the car. And then there's sports cars where you're turning left and right. You're racing in the rain. The friend group that I accumulated when I started racing was a sports car group. And because I didn't have the experience mechanically or in the automotive setup or anything, I really just kind of stuck in that group. And I performed well in that space and won a bunch of races my first year, more races the second year. And at the time in the early to mid 90s, sports car racing really had a resurgence. And tracks like Road America, Road Atlanta, Mossport, the Long Beach Grand Prix, Laguna Seca. And now they're blossoming, right? There's so many people in today's world that are taking the wonderful road cars we have access to and taking them on track. But my first car was a Mazda Protege. It was a crap wagon. I mean, it had stickers all over it. It had a welded-in roll cage. It looked like a little four-door sedan you drive on the road, but we made that thing defy the law of physics. I graduated to a Dodge Neon, which was a souped-up version of the Dodge Neon that Dodge sold. And in some of the races, there were 100 cars on the track at the same time. But you could make some real money in a weekend, 10, 15, 20 grand. Gosh, when I was working at the time, I wasn't making much more than that. So you were able to win enough to cover the cost of the car. And that's kind of why I pursued that sort of racing. And, I was very fortunate in my network of people and through some good luck and performing reasonably well to have opportunities with teams like Real Time Racing, one of the winningest auto race franchise in history in the United States, Bimmer World, TRG. And I've had some fantastic teammates, Peter Cunningham, Boris Said, Kuno Whitmer, Eric Curran, Brandon Davis, guys that won championships in multiple different series. And it really was an interesting place. Once you graduate to pro racing and it's on TV, now you're the quote unquote man in the arena because you're failing in front of not just the people at the track, but everyone. And if there's 28 people in a race, there's one winner. And there's 28 losers.
When you talk about these mentors and the people that you're meeting along the journey, if you coming into this and being a novice, but you have skill, you have talent, you're making it happen, were there people specifically that gave you advice? I mean, you mentioned the kindness and people offering help, but were there like mentors for you along the way that kind of took you under their arm?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my first mentors, his name's Peter Cunningham. He's probably one of the top 2 or 3 most winning sports car racers in the United States, in soup to nuts in any series. And the first autocross I went to, where you race through the cones, he was the instructor. And we're still great friends now. And, we've been through, racing and business and relationship, and, you really gel together. But he provided me with guidance and, took a liking to me early on, probably to his chagrin now, but being able to lead me in a direction of, hey, this is the team you want to race for, or don't go and do that, or stick to this series, or wait another year until you go and do that. And having that help and guidance, because whenever I was in a series below him, he'd always make room for me to be in the area where the big boys were. And then when you're around those guys and you have some interaction, they knew that they were where you were a year or 2 years ago. So they'd reach out the olive branch, and I learned so much about, patience, and I'm still not the most patient guy in the world, emotional control, discipline, focus, and details. And, we're all works in progress over the course of our life. And there are a lot of times I'll look back at a window and I'm like, gosh, I really look back and I'm almost embarrassed of, where or who I was at that exact moment, because I hadn't had the life experiences to develop. So Peter Cunningham was a great mentor. Boris Said has been a great mentor and friend to me. And I've had a whole litany of others at the track, but then I've had a lot of others too on the business side of things that have helped me direct. But I will say that my auto race career really led to me being involved in this football helmet business. And there were just a lot of synergies, and we'll talk a bit about that a little later.
Yeah, well, one of the things that just you taking that leap and saying, "Oh, I see that poster, like I want to do that." It makes a lot of sense that you don't necessarily need to be. You have that entrepreneurial spirit that you want to do something, and you just jump into it. So it does make sense for you to say, like, some of the lessons that you've got from your mentors is more about patience and control and helping you, navigate at the right pace going forward. So that's cool. Everybody needs those people, whether it's, to slow down or, not necessarily on the entrepreneurial front. Sometimes people need to be pushed a little bit and be told like, no, you need to go. But I don't see that too much on the entrepreneurial side. Mostly it's slow down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I told somebody this story. I was playing football at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and we're walking out of practice, and some of the guys are like, hey, we're going to run the special forces drill. Guys are running hills. And I remember just walking right by and jumping into the big garbage can full of ice because I was done for the day. And I remember thinking, gosh, how embarrassed am I now that I didn't go and run those extra laps? But, did I realize that when I was 21, when I was 31? I'm not sure exactly when, but I certainly, you don't only learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. And when I look back at that, the other guys may not remember, or they may remember. I'm just a faceless person that didn't do what I should have done, but I learned from that. And then after that, not only do I press myself to do it, but you try to press the people around you, to do it. And the one thing too is you go up the chain in racing. It's like anything else. If you look at a quarterback like a Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady, the repetition, the discipline, the film study, what do you eat? What do you drink? What don't you drink? What don't you do? You don't stay out till 3 a.m, whatever those things are. Shaping yourself is a series of habits. And it's the same thing in the race world of being able to shape yourself, but then having the discipline where you can apply it to other things. And whether it's going back and getting my MBA or running businesses, or how do you mentor people so that they don't walk past the special forces hills and they go do it, but they do it when they're 20. They don't wait until they're 30 like I did. And how do you do that without someone feeling like they're being pushed? And that happens with your kids. It can happen with coworkers. It can happen in relationships. And I've had my success and failures in all of those categories.
So I want to talk about the business side. So when did you first start going into the entrepreneurial business? Because you're having success in your racing. Was it something that you were doing at the same time, or were you like, okay, I need to pivot here and start focusing on something else?
So now you're going to laugh at this, but I was working at Merry-Go-Round Enterprises in the 80s. It's probably 1986 or 1987. And I was playing football, in this college. And I come up with this idea of shorts where the shorts were a little longer than they were in the front. So I called them knickers. And I had my aunt sew up a couple pairs. And when I knew that merry-go-round buyer was in the store, and I'm working at the mall, I mean, this is like 16 candles stuff, right? And the buyer's like, this is a great idea. Well, he called someone and said, I think we can improve employee morale if we show that, if employees have good ideas, we can run it up the food chain. So they orchestrated for me to fly to New York, went to the garment district and took my shorts out there, and I sold a handful of them. And, with true fiscal responsibility, I quickly took the money and bought a 5-liter Mustang, which, I drove and broke all kinds of laws with for another time, maybe the R-rated version of the podcast. So that was my first entrepreneurial folly. And when I look back at that, I didn't understand finance, capital structure, intellectual property, distribution. I just was an idea guy. And everybody's got ideas. But being able to take that idea and either finding a conduit to where it can be monetized, or being able to do it yourself and knowing your weaknesses and your strengths and finding other people that can operate around you is an art. So I started there. Then I had a butter dispenser that looked like a deodorant stick, and you'd turn the bottom and the butter would come out. So when you were at a picnic, you could put it on corn or bread or whatever else.
I love it.
And I reached out to some of the consumer packaged, food companies. No luck, little frustration there. And then I had a company called Career Generators before Monster came out. I'd run little ads in the newspaper. People would send me their resumes. I'd scan them and have some friends clean up all the character recognition. We'd put them on a CD and then hand them out to the local HR departments in San Diego when I moved here. And then eventually we went to the HR departments and said, hey, as opposed to paying 30% of, to a recruiter of what someone's salary is, you can buy these CDs that have all these resumes on them, for X dollar amount per month. And I got that running and kind of floundered a little bit there. And of course, I'm doing all this concurrent to having a regular job and racing cars. So time management or the lack thereof it certainly factored into some of my successes and failures.
But you took those steps though. And that's one of the things that I love about entrepreneurship is that people that put their money where their mouth is. Like you said, everybody has ideas, but like, how do you execute on that idea? And what I have learned, and it's painful at times, it's definitely frustrating, is that it's slow. Like it's never just like it clicks and then it goes, but there's a process to it and the learning through that process. So all those things that you mentioned, like, I floundered and this and that, but the amount that you learn by doing, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And then you could take that into your next step. And that's not going to be perfect, but you do have more tools in your belt than you did when you started.
Yeah, absolutely. The first company that I really started where I was taking the plunge. And one of the biggest things I hear from people that are aspiring entrepreneurs, especially if they're a little farther along in life. They're not 22 years old, just graduating from college, but maybe they have a family or maybe they just got married. They have a nut, they have a house payment or rent or a car payment, insurance, health insurance, et cetera, is how do I transition from lifestyle creep? Maybe I'm saving a little bit of money, but now I'm going to not make money for 6 months. How do I make that transition? And what I did is I would look for positions that were available and then offer those employers my services on a consulting fee. And then I would just stay up late or work on the weekends. And once I strung some of those together, I could jettison the actual full-time position. I worked for internet company .ws domains when .com is really one of the only, I don't know if you call it a TLD or whatever, the domain extension. And I learned so many different things there. But once I started my marketing company, 2001, I had a partner initially, and we would go to big companies that had huge databases of product buyers that had purchased from television. We'd take those buyers and we'd cross-sell them whatever the inventory was that company had. So if they had bought Miracle Blade knives, we were selling the knife block and steak knives with it. And we used direct mail, early stages of email and commerce, and then some teleservices. Sometimes we'd make a ton of money and sometimes we'd make no money. And my former wife was extremely supportive of my desire to pursue that. and even to this day, we've not been together for 14 years, but you need people around you that are supportive of that, because you're fighting a battle in front of you. The last thing you need to be doing is, fighting that battle behind. Then I started to get some traction, and I met a partner, Ari Wasserman, and in fact, we're very different people. So he's an Orthodox Jewish guy. He writes Jewish law books for a hobby. He's got, half a dozen kids, wears a trench coat in the summer. And, when he and I
it's very specific.
He still does. And in fact, I'm a guest speaker, I think, at Jekava University in New York, where I'm like the only non-Jewish guy talking to these kids about working with people that are not Jewish. But so here you have an Armenian guy and a Jewish guy working together. Harvard Business School actually did a case study about us, about our company, Revenue Solutions. And he worked at a vendor, and my consulting company was in there, and we decided to start a company. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we knew we were going to do some sort of marketing initiative. We would come up with products and we tried to sell them. We worked together and ground through it, and barely made payroll. We had 1 or 2 employees, and I'd come home and I was just fatigued. I'm like, my God, we're never going to get any of this over the goal line. And you start to think, gosh, what could I do next? And the second you do that, now you've lost the initiative because you're not fully committed, because there's an out, there's a B plan. Don't have a B plan. And we can talk about when there's a point to quit, but it's not really quitting. It's just like the Marines would say in Korea, we're attacking in a different direction. But we finally got to a point, the economy got a little wobbly around 2007, and we had come up with a concept for a book called Debt Cures. And it ended up being one of the top 100 books of the century. We hired the snake oil salesman, Kevin Trudeau, to come and do an infomercial. We put all of our pennies together, and it was $150,000 for him to come in for the day. And I'm like pulling quarters out of the couch, selling, tools and baseball cards to come up with the money. We shot the show, we put it on air, and it was a huge home run. And then we followed on with a bunch of other infomercials. And who would have thought? I certainly didn't. Having an MBA, having played football, I'm racing cars. I kind of feel like, I seem like a corporate guy. I absolutely wasn't. But, this company, we grew to $50-60 million company, and we only had 8 employees. We sold things on television, and it was a huge hit until e-commerce really attrited into television media. And we just decided, hey, we're gonna go our own way. And Ari's a successful guy, moved to Israel, 6 kids, still writing Jewish law books. I got divorced, kept racing cars, went through the Sheriff's Academy to go do search and rescue here, served warrants on a U.S. Marshal Violent Fugitive Task Force, and a bunch of other crazy things. But we're still good buddies. And, it's a crazy life, and that's when this whole light helmets, and at the time it was called SG helmets, kind of got on my radar.
Well, okay, I definitely want to spend a decent amount of time talking about that. But the search and rescue piece, where did that come from?
So during my race career, everyone in my family was in the military, and I was not. And I'm very conscious of the ability to be able to go out and start a company and take a chance, right? Or to be able to drive across the country, or to not worry when I sit down at a cafe that somebody's putting a bag next to me that's going to blow up. That being an Armenian kid, no one looks at me any different. I had every opportunity that anyone else did. That the women in my life could make any type of career choice that they wanted. And the country's not perfect on that front, but having that blank canvas to go and do that, I'm very conscious of. And my father being a Marine, my family all being in the military, and then watching, like I said, my early memories were the Vietnam War, and then the first Gulf War, and then, 9/11, and what an impact that had on me. During my race career, we donated the race winnings and any contingency money to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. And the Special Op Warrior Foundation puts the kids of fallen special operators, whether they're a Ranger, SEAL, Air Force PJ, Delta Force, etc., through secondary education. And it could be welding school, it could be Embry-Riddle, it could be Harvard Law. And I really got a taste and a flavor meeting these families that had lost this matriarch of the family that was an operator, what their lives were like. And, I always felt a little bit of a part of me missing that I did not give potentially as much as what some of the other people. And I knew I would never get there because these are very much the best and brightest among us that have made a choice to put themselves in the highest risk position on behalf of all of us here. And most of us don't even know a Navy SEAL or a Ranger. Only 1% or less of the population of the U.S. has served, and even a smaller percentage in that special op range. So, I was involved in that, and I was at a fundraising event, and someone said to me, hey, there's this thing in San Diego. You can get involved in search and rescue. You can do heli-rescue, motorized, mounted, which is on horses. You could do medical, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, man, this is great. So I signed up, went through all the background checks, and then there's a pretty significant academy that you go to 2-3 nights a week and, every other Saturday. And man, it was the gamut. And I thought it was great. And right after graduating from that, San Diego had some huge fires. And, we did body recovery. I'd done evidence recovery. We found people in the desert that had gotten lost. Sometimes we find bodies that we didn't find the person in time. And you have this very rigid organization, because here you have civilians working with law enforcement, maybe from multiple municipalities, in mass disaster or in a dangerous scenario, or simply looking for evidence. But if you made a mistake, the evidence was compromised. So there was a system in place. And even though you had to think on your feet, there were rules in place for a reason. And you can still think on your feet and have rules there, or standard operating procedures, as a lot of people will say. And I really learned to apply that in my business as well. So again, it was a great learning experience. I met a lot of great people, did it for about 10 years. And during that period, I had some retired military buddies that were SEALs that were doing a violent fugitive task force. They were involved in it in one of the adjacent states. And they said, hey, you've gone through the search and rescue thing. We'd love to have somebody that can drive. So if somebody gets zinged in one of these events that we're involved in, you can get us to the hospital, because in these rural areas, a lot of times it's hard to get transported. So I had 6 or 7 years of that. And that's a whole nother crazy series of stories. But in every one of these things, that was a takeaway from the people, from the organization, from the mistakes, from the successes, et cetera, that you can apply to business.
And one of the things that is a common thread here is that, you're not afraid to take these chances, these risks, and explore where your interests are. And you're like, I'm going to try. And you just do it. And, it's not, from what I'm taking from this conversation, it's not going to be perfect right away. But because of the successes you had and the lessons that you've learned, that just leads you to take the next step. And that's one thing I talk about that often to folks that, that maybe are a little younger than me, that I mentor and work with. It's like, you got to take the shot, because there's something on the other side of your fear that is a lesson, and it's just going to empower you to the next stage. So that's fantastic. What a cool journey so far. And we didn't even get to the light helmets yet. But wait, before we do, I guess, when you mentioned, I believe his name, you said it's Ari Wasserman.
Yes.
Yeah. When you mentioned, you were like, yeah, I don't know what this business is, but there's something here. We're going to do something. Was it really, you both had that feeling like, we got to do something?
We totally did. We knew that it would be in the direct to consumer industry, right? But we didn't know what the actual home run was going to be there. And in fact, in the early stages, and you're probably too young for this, but when you would dial 411 on your cell phone, it would cost you $4 or $3 to get the number, because this was before the iPhone, where you could search the number down. Well, there was a company called Free 411, and what they would do is, if you called, Free 411 or star 411, and you were looking for a flower store, you'd go through that exercise. It would play an ad for a flower store. So we got involved in going and searching for all the different verticals and putting the ads there, and we made some money, and the company crept along. But we ended up making real money in the infomercial and the aftermarket business. We knew it would be in that space, but I tell people too, even at the company I run now, I don't build a strict org chart and then try to search for people, because you're never going to get the perfect fit, because it's not just the chart, but it's the people on the chart. But if you go out and find good people and you make the org chart and it's malleable enough to work around the people. Now, obviously, you have to have somebody that can be, a CFO. You have to have somebody that can be a marketing person. So you need the general people, but you can weave org chart around those key people that catalyze the path to where you want to get. And you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to put yourself in places of discomfort. I don't care if you're in the gym. If you go to the gym and you feel no discomfort, you're not going to gain any endurance. You're not going to gain any strength. if you go and you're taking a class that's so easy that you don't have to study or that you don't have some anxiety before the test, then you're not learning anything. And you have to be willing to fail. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that we've made culturally in this country is there are no losers in a lot of these youth games. There's no winner or loser. Everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a trophy. That's not how life is. You have to be okay with there being a loser. And then it's okay to be upset when you lose. But you have to be able to manage that emotion. And you have to say, gosh, what am I going to do? Am I going to run more wind sprints so I don't get tired at the end of the game? Am I going to be more focused? Am I going to adjust how I play? Maybe it's a coaching thing. And it pushes you to be better. And maybe you don't win every game, but you will start to learn to build a structure to get from failure to success versus just pretending there is no failure. And it's important to look for people or people that can be fostered that are willing to fail. And I'd much rather have an employee that makes 95 decisions, maybe only comes to me for 5 that they want to talk about, and they make 10 mistakes than someone that makes 5 decisions and comes to me for 95, right? Because now it's centralized decision making and I can only do so much. And you want people to be accountable.
Yeah, on that note, that's like having people that I prefer to have to pull people back than to push them, like in general. But also what you're saying about, and this is one thing I really love about sports, and especially as I'm involved with my son's sports. He's 11 years old and he plays just about every sport. I don't coach him as much anymore because it's time for other people to coach him. But it's like the lessons that you learn through sports, like it's not even just win or lose. It's how do you respond when you're winning by a lot? How do you respond when you're winning by a little, or when you lose by a little or lose by a lot? Like there's so many lessons there that you get to see in real time and get to see them work through, because that's life too. Sometimes you're going to win big, sometimes you're going to lose big, sometimes you're going to win a little. And so being able to navigate that, it's just such a great learning opportunity.
100%. Walter Payton was one of my heroes as a kid. Always, being a Packer fan, that was a tough one for a lot of Packer fans to swallow, that I loved Walter Payton. My race number for most of the time I raced was 34. And one thing I loved about Walter Payton is he never ran out of bounds. He never quit. He missed one game because he had a sprained ankle. He had his biggest rushing, yardage day when he had 104 fever and he had the flu. And I loved that mentality of don't die easy, just keep grinding it out. And again, this isn't the kid that skipped the running up the hills, right? But over time, you start to learn, like, man, between what the mentors tell you, what you absorb yourself, the ability to fail. But when you succeed, how do you treat the opponent? When you lose, how do you treat the opponent? I love when you watch a Super Bowl or a World Series and the game's over, the champion's crowned, and the opposite team stands there for a minute to suck in, next year I'm going to come back and that's going to be me. This is what I'm going to do next time. And they may not get there the next year, but they'll eventually get there. And being able to understand how that works. I love these videos, and it's pretty prevalent in all sports, but so much so in football, where you see it's a tie score, 1 second left, touchdown gets thrown, and the kids on defense, are on the ground inconsolable. And the offense jumps around, and then you see the kids from the offense go and pick the guys up on the other team, tap them on the back, give them a hug, and move on from there. That's such a good learning experience, because that event that happened in that 30 seconds, you're going to be able to apply to your spouse, to your kid, to your friend, to your business partner, coworker, someone you're consoling after a death or a tragic event. That's the beauty of sports. And I think football demonstrates that even more than other sports. And all the sports are great sports. And I don't think kids should be focused on just one sport, but I'm in football, so I see more of it. But whether I'm in the Raiders locker room or at a youth football parent meeting or in a high school, some of the finest young people that I have met that are far better than I was at that age are in these locker rooms in terms of being polite, situationally aware, disciplined, kind, supportive of their teammates. And it's such a good environment for kids to develop. And even if you're not, every parent thinks their kid's going to be in the NFL, right? It's just the way that it is. But the reality is, there's 1,700, 1,800 NFL players, and they're great people. And I will say that I'm shocked at what quality people are playing professional sports. And that includes college, which is now professional as well. But you don't expect that when people are at home and they're sitting on the couch and they're not playing, and they're like, why did that guy throw that interception? Right. Or, hey, Tiger Woods, we have this unique guy. He's a great golfer. Then he has some problems, and they're like, oh, I knew he'd fail. Then he wins the Master, and they're cheering him on again. They're still sitting on the couch because they didn't want to fail. And they cheered him on because they wanted the hope of somebody being able to win, and he won. And then when he lost, it made them feel less guilty about still being on the couch. And, we trademark Man in the Arena at Light Helmets, and it's such a fantastic speech. I'd urge everyone to go and read that. But,
the Roosevelt speech.
Yeah. It is fantastic. And, I applaud everyone that goes out there and is willing, whether it's a female basketball player, a football player, a race car driver, a Navy SEAL, for every one SEAL that gets through the whole training, there's 80%, 90% of the people don't get through BUD/S. That doesn't mean you're a failure. You failed at that task, but that individual task doesn't define you as a failure. And anyone that goes out in front of their friends and family or the public and is willing to, you might be in a Formula One car. There are guys that race in Formula One, their entire career never won a race. Doesn't mean you failed. You're the top 20 drivers on the planet, but you have to, in your mind, be able to prioritize that and understand that you brought value, whether it's to your family, yourself, grinding away and making the best of what you have to offer. And hey, you know what? There's some rough timing in life. I've experienced some of that. I've had far more failures in business than successes. I played football. I wasn't a great football player. I did a decent job. I was a good race car driver. I feel like I was toward the top of my craft. But could I have raced Formula One? Absolutely not. Are they more talented? Yep. More driven? Yep. But my overall body of work, I'll take. But were there areas I could make improvement? Sure. Am I going to lay on the ground and with a bottle of whiskey and a pistol because I left some marbles on the table? Absolutely not. But what's my next chapter? And that's what I think these sports allow kids to do. Is game's over. What am I doing next?
This one thing I really love about this podcast, and it's easy to see the quotes and to hear people talk about perseverance, but you are a true entrepreneur, and you being able to talk about that in real time and actually explain the story about the failures and about the things that didn't work out, it's powerful. And to be able to hear that. So I thank you for sharing that story. And I can't believe we've been talking for like almost an hour now, and we haven't even talked about light helmets. But let's
going on and on too much.
No, it's good. It's all good stuff. So let's start with when you had the idea or like when this started, because it is absolutely remarkable from everything that I've seen it. I can't wait to hear your telling of the story. So when did this come to your mind?
So this had to be about 2014 or 15. And a good friend of mine, Phil Pimp Freeman, who was JTAC in the Air Force, he ran fighter weapons school. And I met Pimp, and it's not what you think it is, but that I can't tell you the acronym on a family podcast. But he and I got to be pretty good buddies through the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. And he was very good to my family, a tour in Nellis Air Force Base, some remarkable technology, but more remarkable people that work there. And he had said, hey, I'm selling these football helmets for a company called SG Helmets. And the guy that runs it is Bill Simpson, the race guy. And I'm at the track all the time. And Bill Simpson was an IndyCar racer, but he also started Simpson Racing. And they made motorcycle, auto race helmets, auto race 3-layer suits, seats. He had an 8th grade education. He was almost like an autistic kid because he was a brilliant engineer, and he changed the way auto racing safety worked. Not 1 or 2 generations. He jumped 5 or 6 generations in a period of a few years. And I wouldn't be here talking to you if it weren't for his equipment. There's not a single person that's raced cars in the last 40 years that wouldn't attribute Bill Simpson's ideology and philosophies and forward thinking that it didn't have an effect on them. So I'm at the track, and Boris said, one of my buddies, NASCAR guy, he's racing in one of the sports car series, says, hey, Simpson started this football helmet company with Chip Ganassi, Simpson, Ganassi, SG Helmets. They've got some guys in the NFL, Dwight Freeney and Jeff Saturday, wearing these helmets. He's getting up there in age and he's mad at the NFL because they're not innovating. Why don't you take the thing over? And I'm like, I'm getting to the end of my race career. I'll look at it. So Bill and I talk. This took a couple of years. We did some diligence and finally got to the point where he was willing to sell the company. And he just said to me, hey, Nick, you're the only guy I know that played college football, but raced enough to understand what these advanced materials in weight, the impact of weight has in impacts, but you've also run a business. Let's put something together. And it took us, 2 years. And he was a pretty obstinate guy. He's a character himself. And he passed away a couple of years ago, but a brilliant guy. And he just said to me, you got to make sure that you don't fail because this can impact millions of people versus the technology in auto racing and motorcycle racing affects a small number of people. So one of my good friends, Joe Hegner, was a big wheel at TD Securities, retired, was running a fund. He had gone through the Sheriff Academy just before me, search and rescue. Another partner, Justin Burt, the CEO of Havas, who had bought all my media for my infomercial company. A couple people from the race world, Jimmy Edmonds, a baseball player, pooled some money together, bought the assets from Simpson, and we started this company. And about a year in, we're like, man, we got something here. We made the helmets look better, fit better. The NFL didn't want to talk to us. They said, your helmets won't pass our test. The colleges didn't want to buy. But we had some parents that were doing research on helmet weight, and they're like, oh, there's something here. So we started selling to youth, and then the pandemic hit, right as we got proof of concept. In fact, I had flown out and met with Richard Green, who owns part of the Eagles, owns First
Go
Press
Birds.
Green.
I'm an Eagles fan. Sorry.
Oh, my God.
When I hear that, I got to say go Birds. Sorry.
He's such a nice guy. So he agrees we had put a couple $1 million in between all of us. And now I'm post-divorce. I've written some big checks. Bankroll started at zero and it was almost back to zero. So putting money in this thing was, like going to Vegas, right? I'll tell you a funny FedEx story after this. We put our money into this thing and now the pandemic, and I'm like, what are we going to do? The phone rings. It's Richard Green. Hey, I got a lot of problems with this pandemic thing. I don't know when it's going to end. I'm sorry. I can't follow through with the investment. And I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? I wanted to lay on the floor with a pistol and a bottle of whiskey, but what we ended up going in research and development mode, didn't take salaries, grounded out. We come out of the pandemic, sold everything that we had. And now we're like the dog that chased the car. Like, now what do? We quickly realized that there's only 2 other football helmet companies, or 3 at the time, on the planet. Unless we were in the NFL, we were never going to get acceptance. In the NFL, there's some controversy there, and they have helmet testing, how they do it, et cetera. They do a great job they're in the business of putting the best product on field. They want these guys to play. Anyone that doesn't think that the NFL is in the business of trying to keep people healthy, they're wrong. Now, I don't agree with all their ideology, and that's a good thing because, competition is what breeds a better product. But we knew we needed to get on the NFL field. And what Junior wears, in terms of a helmet on a Friday night is totally different than what's worn in the NFL. The helmets might look the same, but Tyreek Hill can run 23 miles an hour. The only time Junior is going 23 miles an hour is in the SUV on the way to or from the game, right? So the helmets are very different, and we knew we needed to build that top-tier helmet. And so we started to raise more money. Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, got involved. Tony Romo, Cam Jordan, Darius Robinson, one of the executives from RT Specialty. And then my phone rang, and it was some of the SEALs that I had supported. They're all retired with other businesses. They said, Nick, you supported us. We're going to support you. If you don't get a little emotional when you may get that call, you're almost heartless. Like, I thought it was remarkable that they showed up to help me out at that key time. And they did. So the company's cap table, the owners now, NFL players, former NFL players, Tyrod Taylor's NFL player, brilliant guy. He calls me and he's got ideas. And I'm like, man, that's a great idea. Like, when are you going to retire so you can come and work with us here? So you got regular players, retired players, business people, auto race people, and military people. The common thread there is everyone's used these pieces of equipment or materials someplace else. They get that weight matters. They get that advanced materials matter. The companies that have been in business 100 years, the helmets they change incrementally. We're revolutionizing the space. And, I'm very proud of the people that I have on the ownership group with us, as well as the 12 doctors that have helped us develop this stuff. And these are not the infomercial doctor with the stethoscope around their neck. It's the head of neurology at Baptist Health, Michael McDermott, the Chargers former doctor, Tal David, the guy that wrote Brainwashed, Dr. Peter Cummins. We've got these brain trust, all smarter than I am, contributing and helping move this ball forward. And guess what? Now we're in all the NFL locker rooms. We had players wearing it last year. We're in 100 NCAA locker rooms. We've got kids wearing them at all ages. And the company's just kind of really starting to blossom.
That's amazing. Congratulations. I know it wasn't a straight path to get there. What was the moment that you feel like when it started to get the initial acceptance, like from the NFL or whomever, like what was that like tipping point, do you believe?
So when we partnered with a company called Collide, they're based in Canada, they had come to us and wanted some helmet geometry so that they could enter a contest that the NFL was putting on that had grants for $500,000. And it was called the NFL Head Health Tech Challenge. And the other companies wouldn't give them anything. They didn't want to share their IP. So we gave them the shell we were using. They called us back and they said, hey, we won this challenge. We won $1 million from the NFL. Well, I'm getting inquiries every day, dozens of inquiries in a week. So I'm not listening to these guys. I'm blowing them off. Finally, this guy was just all over me. I finally engaged him and I'm like, holy crap, like they figured it out. So we whipped this together. I call the head of health and safety at the NFL, Jeff Miller. I'm like, are you going to let us test off cycle? Because they test once a year, all the helmets. He's like, if you're working with these guys, we'll do it. So we tested and lo and behold, we passed. Now we didn't get any press out of it because it was mid-cycle. They didn't want to set a precedence for anybody else that they do it mid-cycle, but they were generous enough to give us a shot. And that way we could go get more nickels to put in the jukebox for the following year. And I knew once we got to that point that we at least had a shot. But when we picked up a young athlete by the name of Cameron Rising, he played at University of Utah. He was playing in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. He got knocked out wearing a competitive helmet, which at the time was the number 1 rated helmet. And when you watch the impact, he kind of just got slung down in the grass. I was like, oh my God, the guy's having a seizure. He got knocked out. And, they ended up losing the game. He was fine, recovered. He ended up wearing our helmet the next year. No one at that level of play had worn our helmet yet. Even though we had the lab approvals, everyone was buying from the older companies. And we had to struggle a little bit with Utah, but the equipment staff there was great to us. The medical staff there was great for us. But here was this 24-year-old kid that got knocked out in a football game and was willing to try something new. And he looked at it and his father looked at it and they agreed to wear it. And I will tell you that in time, people will look back and my goal always is that this will be the first piece of equipment in the Football Hall of Fame. Because there's people support, there's coaches, etc. But this kid was the person that was really the fulcrum, the catalyst that took us from being a company with an idea to someone that was on national TV protecting this kid who was a great quarterback and I think still got potentially had a bad injury last year. But that kid had more gumption and courage, as did the school. And of course, now, it's starting to spread like wildfire. But that's a prime example of what was the fiber of this kid, or what made this school open to trying something new where others wouldn't. And I just think that it's a remarkable group of people, and this is a remarkable kid.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait to look more into the story because do you have more like the case study up on the website or something?
Yeah. I've got a great video of this kid, unfortunately getting knocked out in helmet A and then, getting targeted time after time after time in our helmet. But also, Virginia Tech's an independent group that rates these helmets. We have the number 1 tackle football helmet ever tested. And it's also the lightest current one for sale. Riddell makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and our helmet isn't even close to theirs. It's so far ahead. And the same with Shot. And then in the NFL test, like we're right in the meat of it. I think we have the number 1 quarterback helmet tested this year, number 2 overall. And we'll take great pride when we see starting quarterbacks again out there with it this year.
So tell me more about the helmet itself or the helmets, because I'm assuming there's different styles and types, and it's light, so it's the weight is a factor. What are some other factors that? There you are.
Here we are.
Look at that. So those listening, he's holding up a pretty cool looking helmet.
Yeah, this is the light Apache. It's from Memphis. I use this because of Fred Smith, our biggest investor, is a Memphis guy.
Okay. So tell me about other things that you've put into your evolution of this helmet. It's the materials, it's the design. Like how do you go about your R&D process?
Sure.
I mean, anything that's not proprietary. You don't have to tell me anything super secret.
It's a great question. So when we started this process, we set goals out up front. We want to be number one at Virginia Tech. We want to be in the highest category recommended helmets. We want the weight to be under 3.5 pounds because other helmets are as high as 6 pounds, 40% different. We want it to be comfortable. We want to make sure that it's cool for the player because overheating a player leads to injury and subpar performance fatigue, right? Fatigue breeds injury. So we want to make sure that the helmet's light, but it's also balanced properly. So our helmet's a system. There's not one component of it that you can just pop off and take a competitor's component and put it on there. All of our helmets, the Apache line and Gladiator line of helmets, all the components can be swapped. The shells are the same. The face masks are the same. Some of the internals are a little bit different, but it's almost like Legos where you can mix and match. The helmet uses a nylon shell, and then it uses a 3D printed internal lattice. And you think 3D printing, it doesn't require any tooling. It's called additive manufacturing. But we can make a different liner for the quarterback with different diameter, meaning how squishy it is, than, let's say, a safety or a wide receiver or an offensive lineman, because they experience different impacts on the field. So the NFL has done a great job of analyzing impact to say, hey, quarterbacks have the most likelihood of getting injured this way, offensive line this way, defensive line this way. So we make specific helmets for those. And whether it's the 3D printing, whether it's the type of foam we use, lightweight face masks with either chromoly tubing or titanium, the balance of the helmet, the overall weight of the helmet, but also, and a lot of this stuff's not reflected in a test, but outside might be 20 degrees outside, but inside the helmet, it's 90 degrees because the player's, sweating. What is that temperature difference due to the performance of the helmet? Well, nobody tests that. We test that. What happens when you're the starting punter and you're running around getting warmed up before the game, and then you put your helmet down and it's not the NFL, so there's no helmet heater, and that thing turns into a rock? What temperature should that helmet be stored at? How many hits can a helmet take before it starts to degrade in performance? All of these different things, from if you tackle me and my head slams back into the ground, that's one type of impact, versus if I'm catching a seam route and you hit me, that additional 3 pounds that somebody else's helmet might weigh in an ADG impacts 240 pounds of extra force on my neck. So we go through all of those things and we reverse engineer into what our original goals and guidelines are. And it's worked for us to date. And having a number one football helmet, the most highly scrutinized sport, at least for head protection, we're extremely proud of that. And we've done it with a very limited amount of cash. And frankly, we're in the middle of our Series A. We're halfway through. Finance is in part important of any business. And, we're not out hunting for $100 million. So no institutions are really going to invest in this. It's going to be high net worth people and family funds. When you show someone this helmet, they'll say, well, what's patented? Well, we have 11 patents. What stops the competition from coming in? How big is the market? What's next for you? Can you apply this stuff to hockey or construction or bike? And all of those are great questions. And that's part of our overall business plan to build this from, an upstart football helmet company into a very large company that offers a premium product, but that protects the 6-year-old kid and the 36-year-old quarterback in the NFL. It may be a bicyclist and bicycle helmets, could be hockey, flag football, soccer, and other sports as well.
So one of the things that, wait, before I ask this, where are you doing the testing? Do you have a lab? Do you have like a warehouse space that you're doing this testing?
We do. So we're in Carlsbad, California, just north of San Diego, America's finest city, I'd like to say. We have our helmet lab in-house, but it's pretty rudimentary. The more advanced equipment that we'd like to buy will come with this next round of funding so we can do everything in-house. So right now, for some of the more advanced stuff, we actually have to send it out. And there are 3 or 4 impact labs that are very well respected and certified around the country that are very cooperative with us in terms of R&D work, along with using programs like LS Dyna where you can simulate all of this. So we simulate it, then we'll build prototypes, send it out. Then you got to look and say, okay, how are we going to build pre-production units? Because you want to make sure those operate to the same standard as the prototype. And then you have to do destructive testing, because when you're getting tens of thousands of components, you have to make sure that the components all fall within the same parameter, so that your son is getting the same helmet that my son is getting. Those testing labs it's expensive, and you got to fall within their timeline, because you're not only testing against other football helmet companies, some of which have their own lab, but they still use third parties to validate, but equestrian helmets, motorcycle helmets, bike helmets, cricket helmets, and everything else. And, timing is important, because you can miss a whole season if you wait too long to get some of this work done.
Yeah. And when you talk about some of these other use cases, or at least other platforms that this could be useful, I remember there was a story, I forget where I saw it, but they were testing for concussions, and one of the people that do like water skiing, when they're on the skiing, and their heads just bouncing up and down, like they have it. So it's not just necessarily those hard impacts, but it's the little ones too. So I just, there's so many uses, and like figuring out how you can stabilize and do things. So yeah, you got a lot of green grass ahead of you, a lot of opportunity.
The weight thing is the enemy in any sport. If you ask anyone in auto racing, motocross, or the military, where, catastrophic helmet failure or an event is a fatality, they'll tell you that weight is the issue. When you watch UFC, you can hit me in the forehead a lot and I can absorb a lot of damage. But when you start to hit me and my head starts to snap around on my cervical structure, that's when people get knocked out. That's when there's injury. And concussions come in different flavors. You have just a regular kinetic blow to the head. You have a contusion there. You have contre coup, where you crash in your race car and your brain loads forward, and when it slams back, you get the contusion on the back. There's vibration, where, if you put your head up against a jackhammer and ran it, that does something different. And then one of the things that, we've seen a lot of military veterans is concussive blows, meaning pressure change. So somebody puts dead cord on a door, and instead of standing 30 feet away, because they don't want to let the bad guys recover before they run in the door, they're standing right there. Well, when you blow 30 of those off in a day, those are 30 small events. A lineman in the NFL, he's probably getting hit in the head every play. It's not as big as the catastrophic wide receiver hit or quarterback hit, but he's getting hit every time. So managing the headgear, managing the weight of the head, managing fatigue, dehydration, the different types of biomechanical makeup of different people, right? You may be more predisposed to a concussion on a Wednesday because you didn't drink as much water or you're fatigued than you are on a Sunday. You can't have a test that covers all of those variables. So you have to have some rules of thumb in place. And the medical component of this, which is like post-injury, where you don't necessarily see somebody have an event like, the quarterback that had the seizure. There's not binary where there's no injury and a serious injury. There are slices where you don't notice. And now they're having gait analysis, meaning somebody can look at me before I crash on my dirt bike and after and say he's had a concussion based on how I walk. They can look at, pupils with a piece of technology tool or test that you take. And the learning is advancing rapidly. But in the meantime, these contact sports offer so many benefits to these kids. It's a fine line of, hey, we got to coach better. We have to recognize injury better. We have to have better equipment, right? And then better recovery on the back end of this. And football's never been safer to play than it is now. Still a dangerous sport, and our helmets, nor can anyone else's guarantee that there's no chance of injury. But the goal is to reduce the frequency and reduce the likelihood of it while still letting the kids play.
Of all the things that you're doing right now, because you just when you mentioned like you're working with doctors, you're working with, the materials company, you're doing this. What for you has been the most fun? Or have you learned the most of your that surprised you? Like, oh, I didn't know that. Because there is a learning curve that you had to figure out, and you're meeting with these doctors, you're meeting with these people, you're doing the business, you have to be in so many different things here. Is there anything about this whole process that jumps out to you that really is clicking with your soul?
I think so. There's probably two. I would hasten to say which one I like better, but one is the research and development component, because we have an engineer here, Kodiak Brush. He went to MIT and he played football there. He's a leading tackler there. 30-year-old kid. He's brilliant. I put him up against any engineer in the space at any company. And the outside engineering firms that we use, including our friends up in Canada, Clyde, that won the NFL Head Health Tech Challenge, when you are dealing with these guys and you can see, and women, and you can see the wheels turn, and then I'm sitting on the side and I can recognize certain things that they're talking about or make suggestions that fit in. And you see this product kind of going through its cycle. And then when an athlete puts it on and says, wow, I can't believe that this is this light, performs that well on the test. Or a kid calls me up after a game or texts me, and I get this all the time from NFL and college players and high school players. Boss man, or Mr. Esayian. Tyrod calls me boss man. I really got clipped. I can't believe it, and I feel okay. Thanks so much. And it's both of those, but it's the Dan Orlovsky from ESPN whose kids wear these. It's the Peter Cummins, who's a forensic neurologist whose kid wears this. Tony Romo's kids wear these. But I tell people all the time, my kids played hockey and my younger son played football at a big high school in California called Cathedral Catholic. He went to Utah, was on the team, got cut. Now it's like, is he going to play, not play, or is he going to go play rugby? My son wore this helmet. And just like you, I would do anything to protect my kids from injury. Former wife was so nervous about my son playing football or switching to football from hockey. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, hockey's like, caveman, like you can get hit with the stick, the puck, the boards, the pipe, the ice, shoulder, knee, skate. Football's easy compared to that. But, they watch the NFL 30 for 30, the 85 Bears, and they're both crying after, like, okay, he's going to play football. Getting him through those 6 years and knowing, or 7 years, no headache, no injury. But I hear from the kids and interacting with the players. And like I told you earlier, these are some of the greatest young people that the country has to offer. And people think football's a violent game. These guys are arrogant. It's absolutely not the case. We just had Joe Flacco and Dennis Pitta in here. And I'm like 5'11", like 250 on a good day if I eat the single cheeseburger and not the double cheeseburger. I look like a baby compared to these guys in the picture. What gems of guys, and how insightful and smart related to business. And their kids were with them, and being good dads. And it's refreshing to see when they're excited about it. I feel like my work is worth it because I've had some rough days in this space. We've had failures like others during the pandemic. I went from a point where I was retired. I could travel anywhere, do anything I want, where I was taking a kid gift card to go buy noodles at a Target because we were so out of money and trying to keep the thing moving. And it's embarrassing to even say that, but to go from being done to I remember sitting home and cooking that up and thinking, man, I have hit rock bottom and I feel alone. Am I going to be able to do this? And we're still not there. But that said, the reward is watching these kids be able to play and how they're excited about it and how we're providing the next level of protection. And frankly, I love that our competitors have to try to compete with us. They're now focused on helmet weight. The new Shed helmet came out and they're talking about helmet weight. 2 years ago, your helmet weighed 6 pounds. So competition makes all of us better. And that's the beauty of the country. It's the beauty of the sport.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Another note, you mentioned Joe Flacco. So I went to University of Delaware, so he's a blue hen. Yeah, I like to hear that. I like to hear good things about other blue hens.
He's a great guy. He came in, he had his 4 sons here. 3, I don't know if he had all 4 of them or 3 of them, but man, he's a tall guy. He's like 6'6", and he's 40 years old, looks great. We saw him the next day. They were playing at a RX3 flag football event up at one of our financial partners. And man, in the middle of the game, he came trotting on over, and what a gentleman. And the same with Dennis. And it's great to see these guys giving back too. They don't need to go and play in a flag football game. You look at the career earning of these guys, but they know that they're fortunate. And football's done with all of us before we're done with football. And my talent level and my, physical dimensions from a football perspective, probably, left me at the altar, at a Division III school. But you look at a guy like that, he's played at all these different places. He's playing with guys that are almost half of his age now. And it's remarkable. But at the same point, man, guys, great leadership skills too. Even the college kids, they're just a pleasure to work with all of them, and the parents as well, because they appreciate what we're doing. And I think more so than anyone, the people that really do the research on what's the best technology out there are the moms and dads.
When you mentioned the rock bottom, when you hit rock bottom, it's I think I want to make sure I put a pin in that. And because of all the things that you've done and you've had success and, you've hit rock bottom, but before, like, there was another rock bottom and there was another rock bottom, but all the experiences that you've had and the people that you've surrounded yourself with, and they know how you are and who you are and what you do. It's inspirational, man. It's really cool to hear you, and you're easy to root for. I'll say that.
I appreciate that. And, when I was kind of flying high, I'm racing cars, I'm doing this fun thing in New Mexico with these retired team guys or serving warrants, got some money, playing a little tennis. I had some flexibility. You're sympathetic when you see other people struggling, right? And I had gone through a lot of struggles to get to that point because I started with zero. But getting to the point where you really are getting your ass kicked, where you're at the bottom. I was sitting at my former wife's place, and I was coming over to see my kids, and we had a great relationship after the last 5-6 years. And I'm sitting there, and I was reading an article in The Athletic that had been published about our story, the ups and the downs. And I kind of had my face in my hands, and my former wife, who's not always free with the compliments, said, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Man, I just don't know if I did the right thing in going to do this. And I don't know why it's so hard. And, I hate being the candy ass sitting here, but I feel like a victim." And she's like, "The reason you're doing it is because nobody else can do it. So go and do it." And hearing that from somebody that normally would be telling me, "Why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing that?" That was my personal victories, and to her credit, and some of my friends too have been really supportive through this. When you go through these periods, and I will tell this to anybody else that's listening to this, you're going to have relationship problems. I've gone through that. You're going to have financial problems. I've gone through that. You're going to have business challenges, physical challenges, people that get sick around you. Keep going. If you can't plot your goal out to where you see it on the horizon, start breaking it down to, "Hey, I'm going to just get to that tree," or "I'm going to take the next step." Keep going. Tomorrow is going to be another day. It's not as bad as you think it is, and it's never as good as you think it is, but don't give up. And when I look at all of the people, all the special operations guys that I've seen, or their families where they're no longer around, and I feel like a victim for even a moment, I think about what those people, men and women, went through on my behalf. So I'm going to live my best day, and I'm going to use every molecule of energy that I have to keep going. And tomorrow you're going to have a better day. And don't quit. I think the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book is a great way for people to kind of get a recharge and a reset. And even if you've read it once, go back and read it again. The Jocko Willink podcast is fantastic. Positive messaging, doesn't talk about politics. It's not divisive. It's, hey, we all have these issues. This is what you need to keep going. And I will tell anyone, and whether it's a politician, an athlete, a business person, I'm sure you've had this in your path. You're going to feel at times like, I'm beaten. Why is this happening to me? And you will never get pushed more than what you can handle. Just keep going and take that next step. And I now am empathetic for people. I will go out of my way even 2 steps farther than I did before, even if I don't have, if I had that noodles that I bought with a partial Target gift card that somebody gave my kid after I bought the video game, I remember it was written on there in a Sharpie, $14.37. So I'm buying the shittiest noodles I can buy in the frozen food section. And I'm like, man, I'm a loser, right? And my outcome's yet to be determined, but I will tell you that it will by no lack of trying, and it will be by no lack of the people that are around me doing the exact same thing.
It makes so much sense now why "man in the arena" is your phrase. Because
it's true. And I tell everybody, if you haven't read it, I'd read it to you right now, but I won't get through it without getting a crackly voice. So I'm not going to do it because I want to look like the tough guy. I was somewhere trying to read it one day, and I had to have somebody else read it. But when you read that and you apply it to your own existence, and there are people that have had a much harder path than I have along the way, that speech defines all of us, because all of us at some point will fail in front of other people. And the difference between the person that at least makes an attempt and fails, versus the person that doesn't try is the difference between living and just existing. And I think that's the best advice I give to anyone. Set your goal, break it down to manageable steps, and then go and attack. And if you stumble, evaluate why you stumbled, what you could do differently, retrench the next day and get after it. On your last day, you won't look at what genes you had, how many cars, how much money's in the bank, where you traveled. You'll be thinking about the people that are around you and the accomplishments that you had that had a positive impact on people. And, I hope I've still got another, few decades left in me to influence others. And when this is over, I want to be able to help people that are in this situation take that next step and then look at the tree and then look at the horizon versus go sit on the beach. Although I'm going to do some of that too with a Corona and a taco.
Nick, you've been very generous with your time and even more so with your wisdom, sage words, man. It's just, again, very impressive. So glad that you're able to share your story. So before we take off, is there anything you want to share with the audience, like where to find you? And I'll include your website and all your socials in the show notes. Was there anything you want to let the audience know?
Sure. If anybody wants to reach out, whether it's about, it could be football equipment, it could be issues and challenges in life, it could be anything else. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nick or Nicholas Esayian, Esayyan. You can find me, online. I'm pretty easy to find. We're in Carlsbad, California. Our website's lighthelmets.com. You can email me, nick@lighthelmets.com. And if I don't get back to you right away, I promise I'll get back to you if we're buried or traveling. I also want to share with everyone, my case is not unique. Everybody has a capability to go and do these things. And you also have the capability, if you're down today and you're having a hard day and you're listening to this, I've been there. Other successful people have been there. Fred Smith from FedEx was down to his last $5,000 and took it to Las Vegas. And, they were going to go bankrupt, and look at how big FedEx is. And if this project, this relationship doesn't work out, the next one will. But you got to give yourself a chance to succeed. And that's by being introspective, but get back out there and try again. And, I think you're doing a great service of interviewing different people to get their perspective. And I also would tell anyone else that you are asking to be on to come on and be open and share your failures as well as your successes, because that's really where you help other people. And we all learn more from when we stumble than, when we're spiking the football.
Oh, that's 100%. Because one of the things here is like the tools, talents, and techniques. It's like, well, you don't just attain them just by people handing to them. Most of it's experience. It's a lived experience. And sure, there's what people tell you, but it's like you need some kind of context or reference point. And so being able to hear from people in different industries, different levels of seniority, just their different experience, I think is really helpful, because you never know what tool from this box is going to help with this project. And I thank you again for sharing, because you definitely inspired me and I'm excited to take some of this wisdom and move forward with it.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on today. Would love to come back on again. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to inquire about the timeline and me. And it was great spending time with you.
All right. Thanks, Nick.